Hello and welcome to Cardinal Dash. So happy to have you here. I'm Daniel Martinez-Krams, joined as always by King Jemison. Thank you so much for being here again. And I'm going to start this off with the elephant in the room, right? It's pretty clear now that Stanford is the reason that the Pac-12 is being held up from playing. Seems maybe we might get some games in about 6 weeks. But I want to ask, how will this short ramp up to this season, if it is just 6 weeks, how will that affect Stanford? King?
Daniel, I think it's safe to say that Stanford is in a much worse position for this short ramp up than almost any other school in the Pac-12 because we don't know what Stanford's players are up to right now. They were sent home. They were not kept on campus. They were not brought back to campus a month ago. There was no preparation for a restart. I mean, it frankly wasn't a real question in the Pac-12 until the Big Ten decided to resume play. But once that happened, the rest of the Pac-12 schools, or not the rest, but the majority, were ready to go. 6 weeks is enough time. They can get on the field and save this season. Stanford may not be in that position because they're treating this thing a little bit differently. And they're treating it as if regular students can't be on campus, then athletes can't be on campus either. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. But in general, that's what we've seen their philosophy throughout this entire pandemic and really throughout the history of Stanford athletics. And that's coming back to bite them in their preparation for this very strange season.
Yeah, initially I was totally with you. I'm actually really scared. I don't know what Stanford's going to look like. But if we give them that they're going to be healthy and they're going to be physically able to start the season, which is definitely not a sure thing, I think it may actually look good. I think this may give them an opportunity to streamline their offense a little bit. I think Davis Mills is a very heady quarterback, but if his offense is pared down a little bit, because we know how many checks the line that KJ Costello was doing. But if Davis Mills has some of that taken off his plate, here, we only have 6 weeks. We're not trying to install a big offense. We'll make it a little bit more simple. I think that could actually play in Stanford's favor a lot. And then we do have to go back to the spring. And Stanford did have that spring practice that a lot of other schools in the Pac-12 didn't have. They had a few weeks. They played a little bit. Obviously, it's been a long time since then. But I think you have to look at those weeks as potentially aiding Stanford right now. But you're totally right, King. It is a little bit worrying, especially with how few people are expected to be in game shape.
Well, I love some of the points you just made, and that's a rare thing for me, so, enjoy it. But first of all, since you mentioned KJ Costello, I want to say I'm super excited to see him get out of that way too complex offense and do what he does best, which is throw the football in Mike Leach's offense this weekend. So, side note for Stanford fans, but tune in to watch KJ Costello play an LSU defense that who knows how good they're going to be. But anyway, we're going to see how good that guy really is because before, obviously his 2018 season was amazing, but he was under this almost burdensome offense, which is what you're talking about. Well, you just can't do that. If Stanford decides to try to run that type of offense in this short of a season, it's not going to work. They're never going to get off the ground. So you have to pare it down, and I do think that plays into Davis Mills' strengths and the strengths of really all the skill position players on this Cardinal roster because you do have some dudes who can do something when they have the football in their hands. So I don't disagree with you on that point, but the first thing is you got to get people back on campus. You got to get them ready, and you have to do that safely, so you have to leave time for quarantining. I think the daily testing is going to make this far safer, reduces infectiousness by 100%, because if you get a negative test, you physically cannot spread the illness. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, but I think that's true. So if you can test people daily, then I think you can play football safely. But you got to get people back on campus now so that they can play safely injury-wise, so that they're not going to be putting themselves in a position where they're going to go out and get hurt because they did not have enough time to prepare for this season.
And that's what it's going to keep coming back to. It's going to be how much are they going to be able to ramp up in those 6 weeks? What has their off-season weights program looked like? Honestly, at this point, we don't really know. We know they were back on campus for a little bit preparing for a season, but that since then they've really taken it in off-season mode where a lot of different players are off campus. Many players went home. We have no idea what they're doing. We have no idea what it would look like. We hear David Shaw working really hard. He's talking about today he's working with Sarah Cody and the Santa Clara to try and get approval, but we have no idea when they would be back, what it would look like, what kind of different precautions would be in place, if they would be able to get in and get after it, right? Because Stanford still that element of ground and pound. And that is something they're not going to be able to practice, at least not initially. They haven't practiced that for a long time. I don't expect the offensive line to have gotten the reps that they needed necessarily, especially as they try and integrate a lot of new pieces, because a lot of the people that were out last year coming back this year, but they're going to be around new players. And same thing on the defensive line, which is maybe one of the biggest weaknesses of this team that we've talked about before, we're really worried about. So how does it look when they're finally able to get back? So there's some reasons to think that maybe Stanford can get after it and be ready in 6 weeks. But as you've been saying, a lot of reasons to be really worried for Stanford.
And you really got to feel for the players, because they were told that their season was off. They were waiting to the spring. And if David Shaw can be believed, his players were fine with that. They were, in fact, happy with that. They felt like the Pac-12 was protecting them. They would have a chance to fully prepare for a spring season. Well, now they're not getting that. And frankly, the truth is they're not going to get a spring season either. So it's now or never. And you are putting people in a very difficult position by bringing them back to campus with such late notice. And RJ Abadia of the Bootleg reported that players are being asked to provide their own housing for the next little bit as Stanford prepares for the transition. Not only are they living off campus, they're having to pay for it. And if that is true, I think that is absolutely abhorrent behavior by Stanford Athletics. You have to find a loophole to get around athletes having to pay for their own housing. That's unfair. If you're not going to pay them for their own name, image, and likeness, which is ridiculous to begin with, then you have to provide for all the costs associated with being an athlete. And currently, Stanford's not even doing that. And the Arcadia article is one I think we should address, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I think it does position Stanford as really the outlier amongst the Pac-12 in a return-to-play situation.
Yeah, it's really worrisome. It's definitely viewing Stanford as kind of this elitist mindset that they want to make sure that if maybe the students aren't coming back, the football team isn't coming back either, which in the abstract makes a lot of sense. To me, as a non-athlete, as a NARP, makes a lot of sense that everyone would be treated equally. But at the same time, football players are providing a service that simply you and I are not. And maybe they deserve that. They deserve clearly to be paid for their NIL. But all of these other things like off-campus housing in this time where they're being asked on one hand, please be around, keep in game shape, and on the other, like, go home, like online classes, you have no need to be here. So it's very, very much a predicament for Stanford. Honestly, I don't know the right answer here. I think you could definitely follow what all the other Pac-12 campuses are doing, and that may be right in one book. And in another, what Stanford's doing, holding the athletes back, that could be right. I don't honestly know. I don't.
I'm prepared to say that I do know the right answer. Stanford needs to come back and play. If the rest of the Pac-12 plays and Stanford does not, it is going to be a disaster for Stanford athletics. And now with the daily testing, I believe it can be done safely. It's actually safer since you don't have other students on campus, so you're going to get much less exposure to the surrounding community. You can't quite make it a bubble like the NBA, but it's going to be as close to a bubble as you can get in college sports in Palo Alto. So the health concerns are not as big as they were before for me. And on the other side of it, you just cannot let the Pac-12 leave you behind. It'll push Stanford back years. It will destroy all the progress they've made in the 2010s of becoming a college football powerhouse. Because if you're a recruit and you see that 11 Pac-12 schools played and one didn't, and that one was Stanford, which is already a very complex process to get into, a much more arduous recruiting process than these other schools are presenting, I don't even know if you're looking at them anymore. I mean, it is just going to completely change the culture of Stanford athletics. And it would show that Stanford has no institutional investment in athletics, which I'm already worrying about the institutional investment as is. And I think that this would show that athletics are not a priority. And if you show that athletics are not a priority, you are no longer going to be able to compete at the highest level. And that would just be a shame, because having great sports alongside maybe the world's best academics is what makes Stanford great. You can't pull the two apart. They are one and the same of this university experience that is different than anything else you'll get anywhere else in the world.
I truly do agree with you there. Yeah, that was really well said. Stanford, if it does not play when the rest of the Pac-12 plays football, will be losing out on an enormous amount of money. I don't see a way where they'd possibly revenue share or anything like that if Stanford chooses on its own to opt out of the season. And given that, that would put every other sport back. every other sport that Stanford said this summer we're committed to excellence for every single sport that we're keeping, it would completely undermine all of that. And you're right. I think if every other conference is going back, that is a strong enough argument. There's still all of the other issues, but I do think with this first step of having the testing, taking a step in the right direction.
Definitely a step in the right direction. And you know what? I want to see football. I want to see Pac-12 football. I think it would be awesome if we get that this season. It may look weird, but football is football, and we can rest assured that it's being done more safely because they did wait. I wish that they hadn't called the season off. They would be in a better position now if they just said, we're going to wait longer. But by waiting, they've made it safer, and I think there's still a chance we can get a few games in, and I'm all for that if it's going to work out, and I certainly hope Stanford does not hold back their own players.
So, in that situation where Stanford does come back, do play football games, if we do ever get to that point, hoping it happens, really, really am, we all are. Where does Stanford go at the goal line? For a few years, they had that fade to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside mostly, and it worked pretty much every single time. Everyone knew it was coming, but it worked anyways. And then last year, JJ's gone, and we didn't really see it anymore. Not effectively, at least. Where does Stanford go?
I still think they got a fade target, Daniel. I think they got a really good fade target in Simi Fehoko. I mean, that guy has the perfect body for it. He's 6'4", 220. I mean, he's the kind of guy that is going to intimidate most cornerbacks because he's going to tower over them. And we've seen that he has good hands and that he has breakaway speed even for a guy that size, but he can go up and high point the ball. And that's what you need in a goal line fade situation. We know how much Shaw loves the fade. It doesn't make any sense if you look at the analytics of it, but I think J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, as one Pac-12 reporter said, has single-handedly justified the existence of the goal line fade. Well, Simi Fehoko is right out of the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside cloth. And I think that we're going to see them do a lot of targeting him in the red zone. And on the other side of things, I'm excited to see the two-back situation that Stanford can operate in this year with Austin Jones and Nathaniel Pete. I see Jones as more of the breakaway, every down back, and Nathaniel Pete as your short yardage guy who's going to be like the classic Cameron Scarlett vulture, getting in the end zone, doing the easy job, not the easy job, but the cool job. Because that guy's built like a bowling ball, and there's no better place for a bowling ball than on the goal line.
Agree with you there, and seeing Houston Haimuli lead the way there at fullback, I think Stanford may have something at the goal line. But I am going to agree with you that they need to go to that fade. I'm going to throw in a few other options. I think Simi Fehoko is great, but Bryson Tremaine caught 3 balls last year, all 3 for touchdowns. Also 6'4", great hands. He was a walk-on, earned a scholarship, really awesome person, and he's a great target at the goal line as well. And then you've mentioned it before, but John Humphreys, the freshman who's coming in, he's 6'5", and by all accounts, a very, very talented person, very talented player. Expect him to be another option. And then I did go back, and I wanted to look at the data and actually back up one of your points, right? You seem a little bit critical almost of the fade, but I'm gonna say that it's been working for Stanford. Okay, so we'll go to the goal line plays. Stanford in 2019 had 33 total plays inside of 5 yards. 21 were rush plays. 7 were pass plays. Okay, of the 21 rush plays, 4 ended in touchdowns. Of the 7 pass plays, 4 ended in touchdowns. So with a third the number of plays, Stanford was just as successful going through the air. And then if you go back to 2018, when JJ was there, we have 37 total plays within 5 yards, 18 rush plays, 9 of those scored. So a much higher percentage that year, especially with Cameron Scarlett, who was really on his stuff there, backing up Bryce Love. And then we saw 4 of those 8 pass plays scored. So I think Stanford, especially where they were last year, that fade is where they need to go from now to the future.
Those are some great numbers. You're really a proud member of Nerd Nation bringing that out. But that is great research, and I think it does point to something. Stanford is going to need to throw the goal line fade. And they really have needed to throw the goal line fade in the past, even though it's maybe not the most artful college football play available. it does get the job done when you have tall wide receivers and a quarterback who's practiced it a lot and can put the ball in the right spots. And it's also necessary when you don't have a running quarterback who can punch it in himself. You don't use a read option RPO type system where you can get some cheap ones, and your offensive line hasn't been good enough to just power it through with the run game. Well, that means you got to turn to the air, and when you have limited space because you're in the red zone, you have limited options for those pass plays, and so you're going to look at that goal line fade more often than not. And I think you're right. They got a bunch of guys 6'3", 6'4", with size. They also have some guys who can run with speed. I think of Osiris St. Brown. I think of Connor Weddington. I think of Michael Wilson as kind of a hybrid between those two. But they have done a very concentrated job of recruiting big wide receivers, and that's going to pay off. I do think Stanford should be a good red zone team. Whether they're a good down-to-down offense, I mean, they haven't been in a while, really. In general, in recent years, they've been a big play offense that has not been able to sustain drives because they don't have enough of a running game. I think that might be a problem again, but I don't think it's going to be the red zone that's going to be the issue, even without that clear-cut guy to give the ball to.
Yeah, I was impressed looking back at the numbers. Near the top of the nation, past 2 years in a red zone offense, 37th last year, which was a really down year. Surprised they were that high in any category. And then 21st in 2018 in terms of conversion rate. Really impressive stuff there. And yeah, you're totally right. Recruiting wide receivers for that exact purpose. And saw the funniest thing today. Someone had, for The Athletic, asked David Shaw for some recommendations. And he was talking about Ozark as a show. And he talked about how he didn't like predictability. What is that? Stanford is the most predictable team out there. That was ridiculous. Most predictable play calling anywhere. If it's a long third down, it's going to be a draw. If it's at the goal line, it's going to be a fade. Certain things like that, if they work, so what? You know what? You got to just say, we're better than you. We're going to do this. You know it's coming, and execute it. And I think that's a little bit of the Stanford mentality, to kind of go out there. You know what we're going to do, but we're going to shove it down your throat anyways. And that's the kind of swagger that they honestly need to regain as they step into this season. I think they need to think of themselves not as a 4-8 team clawing their way out of the cellar, but as a team that the year before was 9-4. And they need to kind of regain a little bit of that swagger. And I think a lot of that comes at the goal line, where you really establish yourself and say, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to score. We got down here, execute all the way through.
There's nothing more humiliating than a goal line stop or being at the wrong end of a goal line stop. And I think about the Pac-12 championship against USC a couple of years ago and how Stanford was not able to ring that bell. That just shows that you are the physically inferior team, and that's something that never happened to Stanford in the past. 1 yard was an absolute certainty. And I think that this year we might see that offensive line start to trend back towards where the Tunnel Workers Union should be. I'm not saying Stanford's going to have a great offensive line, and I'm really worried given the preparation time that they're going to get. But the talent and the depth is, in general, it's there. It's there to succeed. And so I think we may get to see a little bit more of that goal line prowess and that 3rd and 1 prowess that really defined Stanford's program for so many years.
Yeah, I hope they really get back to that. I just want to address this question that we have in the chat here, asking if we want to see unpaid college athletes getting injured and ending careers because they're playing high-level football with only 6 weeks to prepare. Honestly, no. I don't think either of us want that. We're hoping that in 6 weeks they would be able to reach their peak, whatever they would have had in the offseason. That's what David Shaw has said pretty much all along. I think he went on the TreeCast with Troy Clarity back in, what was it, must have been like March or April, and said that exact thing, that it would be about 6-8 weeks that they need. So hopefully they'd have that before they restarted. King, if you wanted to touch on that at all.
Yeah, and it seems like most coaches are saying 6 weeks is actually fairly safe. You can do this safely in 6 weeks, as long as you don't have COVID forcing too many players out of practice, because then that's a whole other story. If you get people on campus and they catch COVID or through contact tracing can't practice for 2 weeks, well, then you're really in a tough position. But no, first of all, they should be paid college athletes, so that's the first thing. They should have a right to their own name, image, likeness. And that would really resolve a lot of my worry, because frankly, I'm not that worried about the NFL games going on. I think that those guys are making the money, and they have the consent, the ability to consent to the situation that they're in. And college football never should be the NFL. I don't think they should be paid salaries, but they should be able to profit off of their own profitability. It's a capitalist society. That's what needs to happen. On the other end of things, though, I think it can be done safely, and I think it's really going to be up to the strength and conditioning department, which obviously is a bit of a question mark for Stanford. It's been a question mark since Shannon Turley left. I think it's going to be an all-hands-on-deck kind of event where you're going to have to maybe cut some corners that you don't want to cut, but I think you can still do it safely. And if the Pac-12 plays, you really have no choice because you just can't get left behind.
Totally agree with you there. Just prioritizing safety has to be the number one. And man, that strength and conditioning department really looked weak last year. We saw those injuries. Hard to put that on any one group. And obviously there's a lot of fluke stuff there, but I think a lot of Stanford fans were worried about, honestly, player safety after the rash of injuries last season. And now, normally we've been talking football. That's what we do here on this show. But I do want to talk about men's basketball because some huge news this past week, and honestly have to bring it up. Harrison Ingram committed to Stanford, a 5-star power forward from St. Mark's in Dallas, Texas, ranked 9th nationally overall, the 9th overall recruit. Jerod Haase and his crew were on him from the very get-go before he climbed up the rankings, and they got his commitment. What does this say about Stanford men's basketball, King?
Jerod Haase and his team, particularly Adam Cohen, are everything that Stanford football is not as a recruiting power, because they take advantage of the gift that they've been giving of being on the Stanford campus, and they work so hard, maybe too hard. They're on the trail constantly. They're never at home. And I think that Jerod Haase has embraced the fact that in college basketball you have to recruit to win. It's almost more important than in college football, and that's saying something. In this modern one-and-done era, you have to get the talent in the door, and you have to show that those talented players can get to the NBA, and he has done both. As much as I wanted to see Tyrell Terry come back, at the end of the day, it's almost better for the program that he leaves and shows that you can be a one-and-done at Stanford. You would never have thought that's possible. First of all, I hate the one-and-done system, and I think it can and will go away soon. But as long as it is there, you have to recruit in that type of mindset. And Jerod Haase showed he could do it with Zaire Williams. He showed it again with Harrison Ingram. And if you look at what Harrison Ingram said, he's not committing to Stanford just because of the education. Obviously, the education is what a lot of guys say when they commit to Stanford, because they should. It's what distinguishes Stanford as a university. But he's saying we can be a national power. And I think he believes that because of Issa Silva, who is another top 35 recruit at point guard, who I think could be just a great complement to Harrison Ingram in that class of 2021. I mean, you got 2 top 35 recruits in one class. That does not happen to Stanford. And I think Silva is a guy who might even be underranked, given the fact that he's really that type of savvy point guard. You can't quantify his impact on the game. And I think that we saw that kind of player work out with Tyrell Terry. So the long story short is Stanford men's basketball is on the come up. And you are going to see this program start to contend for much bigger things than an NCAA tournament berth in the next couple of years. Yeah,
that's the big thing. It's on the come up. And saw an article in The Athletics talking about how Zaire Williams' commitment kind of made Stanford men's basketball cool again. And I think that's what we're seeing here, right? We've had this progression from KZ Okpalo leaving in his second year, and he's in the league now. Saw him really progress through his time at Stanford. And then we have Tyrell Terry leaving this year, and honestly, I think is a first-round pick. So we're seeing all of these prospects really develop a lot. We saw Spencer Jones, who is not highly touted at all, absolutely light it up from deep last year. So a lot of different recruits are saying, you know what, I can come to Stanford and be that kind of player. I can be someone who surprises a lot of different people because I'm going to succeed. I'm going to get minutes early, which is what a lot of these recruits are saying. That Jerod Haase has been fully welcoming of his freshmen starting and playing a lot of minutes because there hasn't been that established players. And then when those established players come along, we're seeing them really, really grow. And now we have a senior like Oscar Da Silva, who's a really strong talent, a beast, both in the stem cell research and on the court, led the team in scoring last year. So we have all these different players, all this different success. Stanford men's basketball is absolutely on the come up, and for a long time hasn't been. A long time, Maples was nearly empty for Stanford men's basketball games, and we're not seeing that anymore. And hopefully fans are able to come back soon because I think there's a lot of excitement in Maples Pavilion right now for this team.
Shout out to the 6-man club. They have done God's work in getting people in the stands and incentivizing students to go to games. You shouldn't have to do that, but you do at Stanford. And sure enough, we are seeing that pay off because Stanford is just turning into a different kind of basketball school. And frankly, there's room to grow quickly in the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12 gets a bad rap in basketball. It's had a couple bad seasons, but this year they were looking at 5 or 6 teams in the tournament. And obviously we didn't get that tournament, so we couldn't really see that come to fruition. But I don't think people would be talking about the Pac-12 in the same way had the 2020 season played out. Either way, though, there's not those established powers. You're not in the ACC. You're not going up against North Carolina and Duke every year. With one good class, like this Silva Ingram class, with more to come, hopefully, you can completely change the dynamic of your program. And I think Zaire Williams is a player who single-handedly can change this year's Stanford team alongside Oscar da Silva. I think if they'd had Tyrell Terry, I'd say they're a top 10 team. Without Tyrell Terry, I still think they're top 25, still a Pac-12 contender. And now we've been praising Jerod Haase as we should. It's going to be NCAA tournament or bust this season. If he is not able to get this roster to the tournament, then that shows that something is systematically wrong. But I don't think that's going to be an issue. I believe in him as a coach. And to address a question in the chat, as it relates to Stanford, I'm more excited about this basketball season than this football season. First of all, because I think there's more time so it can be done more safely, and I think we're going to get something closer to a normal season. But second of all, because I think that Stanford men's basketball is going to outperform Stanford football, and that hasn't really been the case in a long time. Last year it was, but once again, we didn't get to see it come to completion. This year, I expect Stanford men's basketball, book it, will be ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season.
Top 25. Let's go top 15. There's a really talented freshman class coming in, even beyond Williams. They got 4-star and Max Morrell, Noah Tights, Max O'Connell, former lacrosse guy, and Brandon Angel, all 3 stars. Really, really a lot of talent coming in addition to Oscar da Silva. And then Bryce Wills and Dejon Davis, who are excellent defenders, all Pac-12 defenders. And that's really the identity of Stanford. That's why I think Harrison Ingram is going to fit so much into the system and why I'm really impressed with that recruiting job, because he's a defensive-first guy. And they're recruiting different players knowing that they're going to come in and be this defensive-minded team, because that's what the style that Haase wants to play, and it's worked out really, really nicely. Impressed with what's being going on. But now the questions, and I think it does have to do a lot with Tyrell Terry leaving, is who is playing point guard? It's probably going to be Dejon, but probably going to be Bryce there maybe as well. It's going to be by committee. It's basically what it sounds like. That there's no one player like Ty, when he's in, absolutely dominating. And you can say, this is my one. This is going to be leading the charge. And then we also have questions at the 5. Lucas Kasunas is there, and as is Keenan Fitzmaurice, nicest guy on campus. But we haven't seen an established big come in, and then a lot of times stretching Oscar da Silva, and I don't think that necessarily plays to his strengths.
I don't think those lineup issues are going to be such a big deal. First of all, you got Michael O'Connell coming in as a point guard who I think could take that starting job, because you just need a distributor at point guard this year. The other people can do the scoring. And frankly, Tyrell Terry was doing a lot of his best work off the ball, because Dejon Davis quietly improved tremendously as a lead guard. Obviously, his defense is unbelievable. Bryce Wills and Dejon Davis might be the best backcourt defense in the country. I mean, those guys can lock up anybody. And, the problem is that they're not able to do it on the offensive end at the same rate. But I think that started to come around. Dejon Davis limited his turnovers and did bring the ball up the floor quite a bit. Yes, Tyrell Terry was your point man in the sense that you were looking to him for buckets alongside Oscar da Silva, but Davis was able to run the show. I think we're going to see more of that this year. And I think the small lineup works because you got a lot of versatile guys. Spencer Jones can guard multiple positions. Obviously, Bryce Wills and Dejon Davis can guard multiple positions. So with the versatility and length of this Stanford team, it's not going to matter so much that they don't have a true 5 or a true 1.
Yeah, no, that's very fair, and I think we're going to see how it plays out a little bit. Do have my hesitations, but that's all the time we have here on Cardinal Dash this week. So as we wrap, we have columns. They're on sportspac12.com, and you can also find us at sportspac12 on Twitter. All of those links to that content you can find at dashsports.tv. That's where we are. You can find us at Dashsports on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. For King Jemison, I'm Daniel Martinez-Krams, saying tree you next time.